Ta-Nehisi Coates is here, and that's how you pronounce his name. Let me take Z. Z in Maryland's been holding on. He had a question for you that I don't want to answer, so you're here. Z in Maryland, welcome to the Karen Hunter Show. You're on with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Hey.
Good afternoon, Professor Hunter and Mr. Coates. Thank you guys very much for having me on. I'm asking you this question as an absolute fan. I've read your book once and listened to it twice. I have two of your books here that I'm going to hand over to friends. I absolutely adored it. I want to be very, very clear that that's the guise in which I'm going to be asking my question. My concern is about the usage of apartheid. It's always been a large concern of mine, especially when referencing other struggles within this world. One of the things that did not particularly fit for me when it came to your reference of Israel and apartheid was that the legislation in Israel, as I understand it, does not specifically identify Palestinians as second-class citizens, whereas in apartheid, the apartheid government made it very clear that Africans cannot rule themselves, that Africans are secondary citizens, much like what was done under Jim Crow here. But in Israel, it seems as though it's a social status that is unspoken, but very, very well understood. So the similarity there also leaves a gap for me. My mom, who is South African as well as me, was taught sewing and home ec to make sure, instead of math and science, to make sure that she would be a good helper for whichever master she decided to work for. I don't believe that's the case necessarily in Israel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But for two reasons I'm asking about your usage of the word apartheid is whether or not it dilutes it as a war crime, because the subjugation of what happened to South Africans is very, very, very specific. And what happens to people elsewhere should also be very, very specific. And in that same vein, do we need to brand it, which is a term that I absolutely hate, so that people understand that the subjugation of these people is something very specific and very intentional in this area? So those are my two questions. Again, huge fan. Thank you very much.
Just so I'm clear, can you tell me the second question again? I got the first one about apartheid. Tell me what the second one was.
Is whether or not the branding of this works, because what I think is necessary is I don't want somebody else to use slavery the way that it happened in the United States, where people were ripped from their land and then used in another area, because it's similar, but it's not the same. And it's like comparing struggles, which is something that I'm very, it's something that I'm uncomfortable with, but there's definitely a tangent and a line that people can draw in between it, right? It's very, very valid and relevant for the relationship between the people, but not exactly that scenario and stance. And this is my concern about the usage of apartheid. And I'm very, very close to it, of course, because I said, like, my mother went through it. My aunt appeared before the TRC because she was tortured in jail. Right next to Winnie Mandela. So like I have a very, very slanted view of the experience of my family.
No. This is a great question. This actually is a great question. And I think I think a couple of things. I think first of all, there is the obviously the experience of apartheid in South Africa. And there is the crime that the UN, and I'm sure you're aware of this, has enshrined as apartheid, which allows it to be applied beyond South Africa. I just want to state, just some basic things before I get to this. I do want to point out that while, to my understanding, you're correct, the status of the Palestinian people does not appear in general in the laws in Israel. The status of the Jewish people does. And so what that means is everybody who is not Jewish, suffers under offenses. I had the luxury of looking up the basic law of Israel, the nation state laws, as it's called, of the Jewish people. And it reads, the land of Israel is the historic national home of the Jewish people, in which the state of Israel was established. It reads that the state shall foster the well-being of the Jewish people in trouble or in captivity due to the fact that their Jewishness or their citizenship. The state shall act in the diaspora to preserve the affinity between the state and the Jewish people. The state shall act to preserve the cultural, historic, and religious heritage of the Jewish people in the Jewish diaspora. It has a section called Jewish settlement. The state views the development of Jewish settlement as a national value and will act to encourage it and to promote and to consolidate its establishment, and so on. So you're correct. It does not identify the subcaste, but it does identify the privileged class, our caste. And you can just imagine, and all of the evils of those who are not, all of the evils directed toward those who are not mentioned. You can imagine how that works. So it is a different construction, but it is not less explicit. I just want to be, absolutely clear about that. Now, having said that, some of the great, and this is why I've been on this thing about folks need to talk to actual Palestinians. Some of the great, thinkers and legal minds that we have, on Palestine have been troubled by this notion of using analogy to talk about the Palestinian experience. Even terms like, colonialism, settler colonialism, even terms like I use apartheid. There is a great article called Towards Nakba as a Legal Concept by, and I'm sorry, Rabia, if I'm saying your name wrong, brother, but by the legal scholar Rabia Egbaria, who I was just with actually on Sunday at Riverside Church. And he addresses this question because he wants Nakba to be the concept that is used to explain it. Because as you said, there are differences, in apartheid and in what, is actually happening in Israel. And my understanding, you correct me if I'm wrong here, in South Africa, they wanted to labor, like they needed Black people to labor. Israel would like, and this is the horrible part about it, would like Palestinians to disappear by whatever means that might be. So no, there are real differences. My words are always going to be limited. I accepted the terminology of the human rights community. I accepted the terminology used in the reports by Amnesty International and B'Tselem, which I would direct you to, by the way, if you haven't read, because I think they would make interesting intellectual fodder, for you to engage with. And I just want to say, I really appreciate this question. This is why I come on the show, right? Because no one has asked me that. No one.
Listen.
One. It's a great question.
My days are cooler, nights are warmer, and I put the blame on you. Time moves slow, but my heart beats faster. When these eyes are looking right at you, you give me something to believe in, just what I needed. You're the closest.